to my channel. Today we're going to talk about quite an interesting topic. It was a theory put forward by Carl Jung, the famous psychoanalyst, in 1923, a very, very long time ago. That's almost 100 years ago. And it's this. He put forward the theory that all men have a feminine side and all women have a masculine side. I'd like to challenge that theory, but before I challenge that theory, let's look into it and discuss what it is exactly and why am I deciding to challenge this theory. Makes you think. Let me tell you a little story. It was last year. I went for a walk on the beach with my ex-girlfriend, beautiful soul, beautiful woman, and in any event, look, she would walk in any weather, hey, any weather, hurricane, gale force winds, snow, sleet, rain, whatever. So the one weekend, she said to me, let's go for a walk. I said, sure, honey, I'm an easygoing kind of guy. I looked outside, I thought, wow, man, what? It's like a gale force, are you serious? That's what I was thinking inside. In any event, we went for a walk. I put my sunnies on and so on. We went for a walk, and we could hardly speak to each other because of the wind, and I was getting totally sandblasted. In any event, we were coming back, and I got sand in my eye, in my left eye over here. And it was incredibly sore, and my both eyes were just streaming with tears, with water. And by the time we got home, I was in a mess, and it was really quite painful. And in any event, my ex gave me some eye drops and suggested I go lie down, which I did. And sometime later, she just casually remarked to me that, oh, I notice it's in your left eye. That's your feminine side. I didn't say anything at the time. I didn't think about it really. But since then I've sort of kind of thought about it, and as I've started doing my podcasts, I decided, well, let me do a deep dive into this. Do all men really have a feminine side? Can you prove it? Do all females have a masculine side? Can you prove it to me? I've had a look at many other psychoanalysts' commentaries on this topic. And they also challenged the Carl Jung theory, which was put forward, like I said, in 1924. Just remember, that was the time when 1924 men were seen as the provider, and they would go out and bring home the bacon, so to speak. Women were seen to be the weaker sex, and they would stay at home and look after the children. That's how it was in 1924. That was the time, the climate, when Carl Jung put forward this theory. Now let me tell you this, if anybody should be in touch with their feminine side, it really should be me. I grew up without a father. My mother and my two sisters brought me up, so I had a lot of, in my home growing up, I was the only testosterone walking around there. It was all femininity. And in any event, as it also happens, I got custody of my two children when they were 7 and 9. I was divorced, and then I got custody of my two children when they were 7 and 9, and I brought them up single-handedly as a single parent, so I had to be mom and dad. So, some of my friends used to call me Mr. Mom. And when I was young, I was also very sort of proud of the fact that I was in touch with my feminine side, me and some of my friends, we're all creatives. I'm a highly creative, expressive, sensitive soul, And so if anybody should be in touch with their feminine side, really, it really should be me. But in any event, I've looked into this, and I've looked into his theory. He also calls it the anime and the animus, which we're going to get into, take a deep dive into just now and shine a light on that. What does it mean exactly for a man to be in touch with his feminine side, and vice versa for a woman to be in touch with her masculine side? To me, I've looked in it, like I said, and I'm going to prove to you, I think, you don't have to believe me, You can do your own research, but the conclusion I've come to is that it's outdated, that theory, totally outdated. It's now, in fact, irrelevant. It's also, by the way, very misogynistic, sexist, and last and not least, it actually doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So let's have a look at it. Stick around and I'll show you. And if by the end of this podcast you still don't agree, we can agree to disagree and we'll still have a good time. I'll still take you out for a beer or two. So, as we were saying earlier, it was the psychiatrist, psychoanalyst Carl Jung who in the 1920s came up with this theory that all men have a feminine side and all women have a masculine side. He also called it the anime or anima, the unconscious feminine side of a man, and the animus, which is the unconscious masculine side of a woman. The idea is that all virtues such as love, gentleness, kindness, the capacity for nurturing comes from the feminine side, while qualities such as ambition, drive, assertiveness, etc. come from the masculine side. So say you are a woman in a corporate environment, you will need to tap into your masculine side if you have any ambitions of climbing the corporate ladder with its perks and promotions. Conversely, this is according to the theory, conversely, if you are a man, you would need to tap into your feminine side to express gentleness, kindness, compassion, empathy, etc. Shelly Bullard, marriage and family therapist, says this: feminine energy refers to a specific set of traits considered to be the opposite of traits associated with masculine energy. Your masculine side gets expressed when you are working towards a goal, making progress, getting things done, and pushing forward. What the hell does pushing forward mean? Shelly, I don't mean to be disrespectful to you, but what does pushing forward mean? Men can push forward, women can't push forward. Because if a woman wants to push forward, she'll have to get in touch with the masculine side to push forward. What does it even mean? What a generalization. I mean, really. Your feminine side gets expressed when you move with the flow of life, when you embrace your creative energy, when you dance, when you play, and you attune to your internal process. So me then, what she is saying, me as a masculine, as a man, my masculinity, if I want to express myself and move with the flow of life, I have to tap into my feminine side. My masculine side is not good enough. It's not good enough. I have to tap into something else besides myself, and that's the feminine side. Well, it's supposed to be unconsciously built into me. Right? So she goes on to say your feminine side gets expressed when you move with the flow of life, embrace your creative energy, you dance, you play, and you tune to your internal process. So is my masculinity or masculinity not capable of expressing love, gentleness, concern, empathy, and understanding? Is my masculinity or all masculinity not capable of patience, of putting others first, etc.? If this is the case, then there's something seriously wrong with my masculinity. That I can't, I have to tap into my unconscious feminine side. Unconscious. Really? You're going to prove that to me? How are you going to prove it? Conversely, is your femininity not capable of ambition, of assertiveness, of protecting the young and innocent? Man, I know some women that'll rip you apart if you touch their kids. They're like a mama bear or mama lion with their cubs. They will rip you to pieces if you mistreat their cubs, their children. Man, oh man, oh man. Surely we are saying to women that there's something wrong with your femininity, that you have to somehow tap into the masculine something of what I've got. This is totally sexist and misogynistic in my view, and I promise you I'm not the only one. You get Jungian theorists who hold this view. Wait until the end of this video, another maybe 10-15 minutes, because that's when the real meat comes out. Watch. So when Carl Jung first published this theory in the 1920s, that's almost 100 years ago. Remember, men were mostly the ones who went to work and brought home the paycheck, while women stayed at home to look after the kids. In those years, it was generally accepted that women were the weaker sex and did not have the same ambition and drive as men do. Oh, man. I agree that men and women are hardwired differently. And yes, we do tend to have particular traits that are more prevalent in a particular gender. For example, very generally speaking, women are considered to be more emotional than men, and generally speaking, men tend to be more logical. Some people would say more linear. However, in my informed opinion and research, it's impossible for a man to try and get in touch with his feminine side in order to express any form or sort of emotion, purely because of the fact that he's a man. Purely. Men are not robots. Do you know, I mean, who still believes now in these days and times, 2022, that men can't cry, that boys can't cry? Are you being serious with me if you still think like that? If you're a man and you still think like boys can't cry, then you're probably still stuck in 1920 in a caveman, and I would expect you to go everywhere with your club and your bearskin and eat without a knife and a fork. Men are not robots. A self-aware male is just as capable of expressing emotion as a self-aware female counterpart. When a man weeps, he is not getting in touch with his feminine side. He is weeping directly from his masculine side. That's what makes men men. We are also capable of getting in touch with our emotions and weeping. Right? Likewise, women cannot tap into their masculine side purely because of the mere fact that they are women and not men. Wait till what the psychoanalyst Gary Taub says later about this. Stick around. Women, I believe, and you can quote me on this, Stevie Lighthouse, I believe women can tap into their true femininity for whatever they need, from courage to ambition to assertiveness. Drive, bravery, ambition, love, gentleness, self-control, anger, kindness are all part of the human experience, and it's not all of those virtues or flaws or emotions are not just assigned to one gender or the other. That's impossible. Listen, I'm going to talk to you now about Gary Taub, a psychoanalyst, psychiatrist. He wrote this article a few years back. It's called Jung and Gender, Masculine and Feminine Revisited. He says this: clearly some of Jung's ideas are objectionable to modern ways of thinking. Not really? No shit, Sherlock. Women in particular have pointed to Jung's sexism, his turn-of-the-century Swiss-German patriarchal perspective on women and men. Here are a few areas that concern me as being irrelevant or outdated, he goes on to say. Many classical Jungian definitions of masculinity and femininity are narrow, outdated, and sexist. For example, some Jungian theorists identify consciousness as masculine, the unconscious as feminine. Masculine energy is frequently described as penetrating and creative, related to activity and rational thinking, whereas feminine energy is often defined as indirect and receptive, related to passivity and irrationality. Really? While it is valuable to differentiate such varying qualities of the psyche, it is problematic to tie them to gender terms such as masculine and feminine. And that is what has been very, very confusing for many, many people, laymen and women like myself and others. Is consciousness actually masculine? Is the unconscious really feminine? How are you going to prove it? Prove it to me. It is obvious that many of the qualities Jungians consider feminine are tied to inferiority, while the masculine qualities are more highly regarded, at least in the eyes of our culture. Culture is very, very important. Culture and ideology can shape your thinking. If you're not self-aware and you're not a critical thinker, you don't think for yourself. Somebody else will think for you. He goes on to see, this seems clearly misogynistic to me. He goes on to say that about his statement when he said, it's obvious that many of the qualities Jungians consider feminine are tied to inferiority, while the masculine qualities are more highly regarded, at least in the eyes of our culture. And he goes on to say, this seems clearly misogynistic to me. And I agree. I totally agree with that. On a particular level, it does not make sense. In fact, it is potentially harmful to identify women who are powerful thinkers or who are active and creative as masculine, animus, possessed, or unfeminine, as classical Jungian definitions would suggest. Likewise, men who display a great deal of receptivity, passivity, or irrationality should not automatically have their masculinity questioned. The continued use of such classical Jungian definitions seems nowadays to actually muddy the waters, muddy analytical work, and create more problems than it solves. I've got to agree. He goes on to say, I have found that generalizing about what is masculine and what is feminine is dangerous. It's actually dangerous. Often perpetuating gender myths that are discriminatory and damaging. While there is some research supporting biological roots to personality differences, the majority of studies suggest that much of what is considered masculine or feminine is actually culturally determined. Culturally determined. It's not physiological. It's culturally determined. Remember 1920s, women, you stay home, you can't go work, you look after the children. Us men, we'll go out and we'll work, we'll bring home the paycheck. That's culturally determined. He goes on to say, if most gender type qualities are cultural stereotypes, the Jungian goal of individuation to discover and actualize one's unique essence is not served by utilizing such gender stereotypes in analysis. This is clear, 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 clear. For example, if I say that thinking and intellect are masculine, I reinforce our culture's stereotypical belief. In analysis, I'm working with a distinct individual. It damages self-esteem and distorts the quest for self-identity to equate being a man or woman with a slew of culturally determined gender-connected qualities. I couldn't have said it better myself. My patient can be a biological male and be emotional and affiliative without defining them as feminine qualities. In order not to perpetuate gender stereotyping, Jungian analyst Catherine Bradway suggests using other non-gender terms to define the polarities we are considering. In my own practice, I'm attempting to avoid gender stereotyping by focusing on the specific qualities or polarities I have in mind without tying them to gender. So that's exactly the way I feel about this. Viewing masculine and feminine as complementary opposites, while useful at times, is problematic. I was saying earlier, male and female, we're not opposites. It's not that we're opposites. We're just male and female, just different. Likewise, the more people I see in my practice, the more I'm impressed at the great diversity in human nature. I've seen men of all types and varieties, women of all kinds. I'm hard pressed to come up with very many generalizations based on gender. From a psychological perspective, men and women are not in fact opposite. I was just saying that earlier. My clinical experience that they are much more psychologically alike than different. And the differences that exist are not necessarily opposing. However, my Jungian training seems to have gotten me into the habit of looking at everything in terms of opposites. Not good. Not good at all. Including gender. When viewing gender as a pair of opposites, I miss the fact that maleness and femaleness are complex concepts and that men and women are similar in many ways. Jungian psychology emphasis on identifying symbolic dynamics between masculine and feminine energies within the psyche must be balanced by cogent reflection on the community and culture in which we live and the concrete events of our lives. We have to balance our investigations between subjective and objective, inner and outer, and individual and collective points of view, and not only assist the expansion of self-awareness with the patient, but political consciousness as well. What is going to have a look, what is political consciousness? It's just being aware of history and the politics of your country and the culture, etc., etc. I mean, everybody should be aware of that, right? Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. He goes on to say, I'm cautious of psychological theories about women created by males, which is the case with Jung. I believe to some extent Jung's ideas about gender came from his own experience as a sexist, patriarchal man. Remember? Swiss-German, 1924, right? It is unlikely that a man can objectively perceive the psychology of woman, viewing it as he is through his own male psyche. Now that's what Gary Taub says. I'm going to read it again, because that's exactly my point. He says this: it is unlikely that a man can objectively perceive the psychology of woman, viewing it as he is through his own male psyche. Exactly. So then how is it possible for a man to get in touch with his female side, his feminine side? How is it then possible if he as a psychoanalyst is saying what he is just saying through his own male psyche? He's not going to really, and he goes on to say this: while there seems to be no way out from the subjectivity of perception, we must at least recognize that subjectivity and be careful of projecting male concepts onto women, and vice versa, of course. It is now generally recognized that women have been misrepresented by men's distorted, either negative or over-idealized views of them, including some of the personality theories developed by male psychoanalysts. Here, I totally agree. It's a long article. He goes on to say this: it is encouraging that subsequent generations of Jungians have been able to critique Jung's thinking about women. In particular, I've learned a great deal from female Jungian analysts who have challenged Jung's ideas and proposed alternative models for women. One of these is Jean Shinoda Boland. In her book Goddesses in Every Woman, Boland describes archetypal female images for a complete range of human characteristics, totally eliminating the need to identify any woman's qualities or experience as masculine. A number of my female clients have found this approach more affirming to them as women. And he goes on to say, since I do not have the experience of being a woman, it is essential that I look to my female colleagues for guidance in understanding women's psychology. Even more importantly, I must allow my female clients to teach me what it is for them to be female, certainly not vice versa. I must admit that after over 20 years, I'm still learning. Once again, what I'm saying after reading this paragraph, I will ask then, how is it possible for a man to tap into a so-called feminine side of this is what a psychoanalyst is saying. Right? Conclusion. This is Gary Taub's conclusion. To sum up, based on 2 decades of clinical experience, these are the areas where I feel Jungian concepts are problematic or outdated and therefore should be used with caution or eliminated altogether. Right? Incredible. Shelly Bullard, she goes on to say this, importantly, these traits are not associated with gender. The set of traits we've come to define as feminine stem from the expectations we used to place on women throughout history to behave in a certain way. We used to, in 1920, 100 years ago, when people were basically still half cavemen and women, right? Likewise, the traits associated with being masculine are traits we used to expect from men in 1920. Today, 2022, we know people of both genders can have any combination of any of these traits, and no traits are inherent or belong to just one gender or should be expected from just one gender. Well, that says it all. You know, I think I've covered it. Listen, if I've missed something, if you feel I've misrepresented this topic in any way, please let me know. Remember, I'm also just a human. And, you know, I make jokes, you know, when I say to my female friends and my female students, you know, I say to them, hey, listen, when you speak to me like I'm a man, eh? Because, you know, I can only concentrate on one thing at a time. So we joke and we tease and so on and so forth, you know. But I really got to tell you, no, I don't believe that, you know, that men can now have to tap into their feminine side to express emotion, etc., etc. And women have got everything they need in their femininity, from courage to assertiveness to the ability to nurture and to love, and to climb the corporate ladder and to kick ass. Really, 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 that's what I can see. So, well, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Until the next time, arrivederci. Keep your light shining, and yeah, that's it. Until next time. Cheers.